Good day to you. I'm Neil Petch. I'm the chairman of Virtuzone. And those of you listening, this is the EMIR Advisory Council. And you must be wondering, why on earth would you listen to two chaps such as we've got on in this little duet here? We're not singing, we're not dancing, and some of you may have seen us before. So let's try and make this interesting. The main way we're going to make it interesting is the other person in this conversation, Mark Beer. Let me tell you a little bit about Mark Beer. I've known him for 20 years. I wish I went to university with him because he was at Oxford University. So one of my skills is always being aspirational. Mark was the head of DIFC courts. And that sounds quite a dry thing, but he, right from the very start, impressed me as a lawyer that wants to get things done rather than wants to bill you for time. And I think that's incredibly imperative and relevant to the conversations that all of us are having, business owners throughout the UAE at the moment. We can't just deal in the theory, we need actually to put things into practice. And if you have people in the legislative area, in the judicial area, and all of these things come together in DIFC, then you can get things done, and you can get things done even faster. Mark has another thing. I like to think of him as the godfather of the borderless economy. And yeah, Mark, you might shake your head at that one, but it's really true. All my best speeches are plagiarized from things I've listened to from Mark. So I want us all to rewind a little, because we're now a year into COVID. We're all of us facing enormous challenges, more stress than we probably realize. And yet, a lot of these advisory council meetings, we are talking about the opportunities that are in front of us, and they are genuine opportunities. But to understand that, Mark, if I could ask you to rewind a little bit for our listeners and just tell me why you think that Dubai can be at the center of this disruption.
Well, I think we probably have to go back to what we mean by disruption. And we are at a critical phase now of a transition from what people describe as the third industrial revolution into the fourth industrial revolution. That was a coined phrase by the World Economic Forum, where I sat on their justice and their rule of law working groups. And the concept is to move into a digital economy, to transition to a digital economy, something that the United Arab Emirates has done incredibly well. I think back to the early days with Sheikh Lubna Al-Qasimi and the work that she did on e-government procurement way back in the early 90s. To some extent, the UAE was ahead of any other country, certainly in the region and in many cases in the world. The challenge of transitioning to a digital economy is how to make money out of it. It's easy to make money as a government out of physical assets, and the movement of goods through Jebel Ali can be taxed, containers can be charged. But in a digital economy, it's very hard. And it's the same for companies. How many very valuable companies? I hear earlier today that Bitcoin is now worth more than MasterCard and Visa combined. Bitcoin isn't a company, of course, but how many companies are struggling to move and to monetize a digital economy? 50 years ago, a successful company would own things, stock, buildings, equipment. And that was the guarantee to a shareholder that if anything went wrong, there were physical goods that could be sold. Nowadays, the most successful companies in the world don't own anything, maybe a nice headquarters in Silicon Valley. And many of the most successful companies economically are making a loss. We see this recently with the launch of Deliveroo and the IPO, a loss-making company, the same as Uber and others. They're losing money, but they're worth a fortune. So how do we transition, and why do we need to transition? And I think there's three answers to that. The first is we're living in a world of deglobalization. So it's getting harder to do business internationally. There are more barriers, more boundaries, more borders than ever before. We only need to look at the row over vaccines in the EU and with the UK to realize that even in economic blocs, there are increasing problems with international trade, greater nationalism, a decline in foreign direct investment as organizations are almost required to invest domestically. So it's harder and harder to run a global business when you're selling goods and services across borders. It's getting harder to run a physical business, if you will. So the transition to a digital business takes away a lot of the challenges, the borders and the boundaries and the barriers that are going up. The second driver is the battle between China and America. And it seems almost certain to me that that will escalate. And that means that the two greatest superpowers, if you will, however you measure it, economically, militarily, are going to maybe not be at war, but certainly in conflict. And this is going to create further dissonance between East and West and West and East. It's going to be harder for the two blocks to trade together. They'll need an intermediary. They'll need somebody or somewhere that can help them, somewhere equidistant perhaps between East and West. So I think the second thing is to find a way of ensuring a global economy that can continue when the two largest elements of it are not best of friends. And the third element is the inefficiency of the way that we currently do business. You know, we rely on pieces of paper that somebody signs at the bottom. I mean, it's revolutionary for many that we now have digital signatures. I drafted a digital signature law in Dubai in 1991. It's not new, but we're doing business in a way which is inefficient. Contracts are an inefficient way to do business, and that needs to change. So I think with the factors that we're living in a world that's increasingly difficult to do business in globally, we're living in a world that's fracturing between East and West and East, and we're living in a world that's becoming increasingly inefficient to operate in using traditional contracting methods. Those are the drivers towards a move for a digital business, a digital ecosystem. And if we take each of those in turn, how does Dubai and the United Arab Emirates sit in that? Well, I think certainly in the first one, borderless, boundary, interconnectedness, I take the view that the UAE passport is now the number one passport in the world. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs has done a wonderful job in connecting Dubai and the UAE to the world, to making it the number one passport. Someone with a UAE passport can travel to more countries without a visa than any other nation on earth. That's wonderful. That's really wonderful. But why not play that out into the commercial space? Why not allow a UAE registered business to have that same level of access and connectivity, to be able to do business around the world in the same way that citizens can travel, business can also travel? I think the UAE has proven it can do it. It can be number one when it comes to global connectivity, when it comes to people and citizens, but why can't it do it when it comes to business? Now, I know many will think, well, that just doesn't work like that. But that's what they said about the DIFC. You know, the world doesn't work like that. You know, it will never work. And it's been, I would think, a good success for Dubai, now in Abu Dhabi and in other places in the world. The second is the battle between America and China. Well, it's very clear to me that the Middle East is called the Middle East because it sits perfectly between the two. In fact, part of the hub strategy from 1985 was the connector model. And Dubai and the UAE is perfectly placed to support business between countries that perhaps are not the best of friends. So I think Dubai and the UAE is very well placed there. And the third element, the infrastructure piece, I think the UAE is certainly ahead in the Middle East when it comes to a digital infrastructure. The work that's being done in at least two areas. One, the creation of a digital banking environment. Neil, I'll ask you about that in a minute. But the need to have a digital banking environment to support a digitized economy is absolutely critical. You can't set up a digital business environment that requires people to issue certified powers of attorney stamped, you know, with the great grandmother's birth certificate attached to it in triplicate, with stamps from, you know, the Azerbaijan embassy and the Ministry of Justice in Kuala Lumpur. That's a very historic way of opening bank accounts, not necessary anymore. So a digital bank becomes critical. A digital currency to support a digital bank is something that would be of great assistance. A Dirham-backed stablecoin would be of great assistance. But the real trigger will be a digital license, a license which can be obtained from anywhere in the world without the need to travel to the UAE to get it, a license which carries certainly into the GCC and perhaps beyond, that allows for borderless business that would truly be a game changer. So I think on any measure, I think the UAE is really well positioned to do it. That's the theory. But Neil, as you said, the theory is only one thing. What's the practice? What's actually happening?
Well, thank you, Mark. And you're absolutely right. I think you and I have got to stay relevant to everyone that's listening to us now. And one of the dangers is because we are, we're very, very passionate, both of us, about making this happen. And it's wonderful to talk theory, but we need to actually, resonate with people whose businesses are struggling at the moment and talk to them in a way that can, the whole purpose that we've been brought on here is how we can influence people and perhaps give them an insight into what's happening so that they can look for that first mover advantage. And that's, I think that there are two challenges that face all of us at the moment, business owners and consumers and also on the government side. And the first challenge is simply that, because travel has been so incredibly reduced, you've seen all the major, if you look at all the factors that would normally make the UAE economy boost forward, the oil price, real estate, travel and tourism, events, etc. Clearly, neither of those has had the most brilliant of 2020s, and we're still waiting for Europe to come back. So, let's not pull the wool over one another's eyes. That's a tough time. However, look at what has actually been happening. And I remember a year ago sitting with my fellow shareholders saying, this thing coming over from China, it's real. And what are we going to do about it? And we made some decisions. We decided to act quickly. And I would say the same now, which is that perhaps one of the biggest dangers, and those of you that are listening to this who are in governmental positions, my plea to you is, look, I'm speaking to you now from my house on the Palm. Very, very lucky to be here. It's something that Dubai has, it's just amazing. And the property value has, and probably for most villas in the region, has shot up in the last 6 months. Who would have forecast that if we'd been having this call a year ago? So there's some sort of bubble boom going on, and could we have forecast it? Now, if we look at, and if we analyze what the UAE has done, I think it's the most vaccinated country in the whole world now, or certainly the first or the second. It made a decision that we need to do business. Business must go on. And it made some decisions, and I think everyone sitting here is very, very proud of how the country has done that. And it has enabled, my company, we've been, fully going for some considerable time now. I can't even remember the last few occasions when I was working from home. So that's a gift which you're smiling from the depths of Oxford, I imagine. Which family members are you allowed to see now? And by the way, you're being taxed whilst you're smiling at me. So, those of us listening in the UAE, let's not forget that. But my word of caution is that when things start to come back, it's quite easy to return to your old habits. It's like playing golf and going to see the coach, and he gives you a brand new swing, which is going to make you better. When he's not looking at you, the temptation is to revert to what you used to do. And I think that we must not do that. We must seek to spring forward. I think that the momentum is with the UAE. And so there are things such as Mark was just mentioning now that do need to change permanently. I know every now and again I'll fill out an application. I've lived in the UAE 26 years, and there's always a question, and it always makes me laugh, and then it frustrates me, that says, can I please give my address in the nation of my birth, in the United Kingdom? I haven't lived there for 26 years. I have absolutely no property in the United Kingdom, yet there's a form that insists, and we can't move forward unless I fill that out. So those of you that are listening, I occasionally am at my cousin's house in Manchester, and a very lovely house it is. So there are these frustrating things that exist before us, but we must spring forward. And Mark asked me about digital banking, and I absolutely agree with you. When I was on stage with His Excellency Abdullah bin Tuq, the Minister of Economy, he challenged everyone in the audience. I wish you'd been there, Mark. He challenged everyone that we, as a nation, we need to get our trade up to $3 trillion. And how are we going to do that? Well, in my opinion, perhaps one of the most important things is this amazing recipe that we have at the moment, this incredible, safe, well-protected and commerce-friendly nation. There's a lot of people in the world that don't know about it, that don't know how accessible it is. So A, we need to educate them. And then secondly, we need to make sure that the people that do find out about it can reach it. And they can reach it from wherever it is in Oxford that you are at the moment. And yes, they shouldn't have to have a stamp from Azerbaijan and so on. So since we last were at that event, I'm really pleased to see that a challenger bank has launched in the UAE. It's called YAP, Y-A-P. It's the opposite of pay for a reason. And their objective is that globally people won't send money, they'll YAP money, which I really like the sound of. And I know you like your brands, Mark, so that might appeal to you. So that's an example of where the DIFC that has invited YAP to be part of its infrastructure at the FinTech Hive has changed its legislation. And at the last EMIR event, I'm not going to be specific, but I saw a text message, and it was from a very highly positioned government authority saying, what do we need legislatively to make this happen? And it's that ability of the UAE government to listen and then to act. They don't need committees. They don't need huge, massive polls and so on. They do act fast in this region. So I say to any of those ladies and gentlemen listening now, we must move even faster. We must look to remove some of these barriers so that people from all over the world can come in. And I think that perhaps this horrible event, this Black Swan COVID event, actually has created that tipping point to enable that to happen. And Mark, you mentioned something, and so I'm probably sending you to sleep now, Mark, so I'll say your name a couple of times to prepare you. You mentioned something that a couple of years ago, people probably felt that in speeches like this, we needed to say blockchain, we needed to say crypto, we needed to say token. There are a few things that if they're not in your speech, it's not worth giving. And probably everyone in the audience would nod their heads and sagely agree without really thinking that they're going to change their business at all. But Mark, if you could just let everyone know how within our fingertips this side of things is and how it can, because obviously what people who are listening from the UAE, what they want to know is more people are going to come here, more business is going to come here, perhaps not in the old way, perhaps not with thousands more buildings and so on, but perhaps people are coming here virtually. I think it's what you were saying.
Yeah, and look, I think that 3 trillion number's ambitious because I think the GDP of the UAE is about 400 billion at the moment. So it's a long way to go. And I'm not sure a transition digital economy is going to generate that kind of accelerated growth. Singapore, which has been ahead of the curve in many areas in terms of a transition, is actually more about bolstering and maintaining their GDP rather than incremental growth. It is incredibly hard to make money out of the digital economy. But a transition to the digital economy, both for companies and for governments, is more about shoring up their revenues than it is about growing them, to my mind, certainly for the next 5 years. And that's because we are in that transition phase where some ideas will succeed and others won't. So I don't think, I would say it's not so much for the UAE that this is an opportunity to accelerate the traditional business model. As you quite rightly say, real estate is no longer the value proposition for growth. Data is the value proposition for growth. So there's a location, to some extent, apathy, or people are agnostic as to location anymore. What Dubai offers and what the UAE offers is the most wonderful climate for much of the year, including the beaches, and perhaps that's more of a driver of location than actually the business side of it. But if we think about what business needs in order to succeed in a world which, let's not kid ourselves, is going to be incredibly challenging, we have seen in the last 12 months the US double the money in circulation. That will have consequences that are known and consequences that are unknown, particularly as China has not increased money in circulation. So the imbalance between the two has never, ever been greater. And that will have consequences for global trade. Overlay that with an enhanced nationalism that we see, a declining foreign direct investment. And we do have to think about doing things differently. So what does business need? Well, globally, what business needs is access. And it needs access that's safe. It needs to know that when it expands into markets that are growing more rapidly, particularly around, say, Central Asia, or any of those markets which are recipients of the $7 trillion that China has allocated to the Belt and Road Initiative. So those are high growth markets funded by a country paying higher bond rates than ever before, certainly significantly higher than we're seeing out of Germany and the US. So attracting vast amounts of institutional money and spending that money into neighboring economies for companies that want to access that opportunity and which are based in the UAE, which is a perfect place to access it from for many reasons. They need access that's safe. And there's a number of ways of doing that. There's a number of ways, the traditional way, set up subsidiaries and holding companies and companies in the Cayman and a company in the financial center and subsidiaries in Ruritania and all of these traditional ways of doing it. And I'm very conscious, Neil, I don't want to in any way suggest that using VirtuZone to set up lots of companies is a bad thing. It isn't. I'm sure it's a very good thing. But the reality is why do organizations have to go through such complexity to access markets safely? Why do they have to deal with a regulator in every jurisdiction, different rules in every jurisdiction? Why are we bound by the geography of trade in a business world which can be done electronically? We live in a world where, as you say, we can write a contract on the blockchain, a smart contract, which is self-performing. We don't need humans anymore to check whether something was done. The computer will do it itself. We have currencies which exist nowhere, save on 1,000 nodes across 50 countries or more. We have an environment which is digital, a commercial environment which is digital, but it keeps running up against an antiquated legal and regulatory system, which is monopolistic and is geographically bound. And the two cannot continue. So I think the real opportunity is to say, how can a nation like the UAE, with such strong connections, provide safe access from the UAE into other countries? And people would say, well, it's impossible because regulators don't allow it. Okay, fine. I understand that. I understand that regulators do not like this concept of free movement of business. They like to control what's going in their jurisdiction. I understand it. But I would say it's outdated. It comes from an era of empire where control and geographical control was an important part of controlling the world. And I don't think that's where the world is anymore. So almost certainly it seems to me that the opportunity for the UAE is to find a way of issuing a license which is accepted in multiple places without the need to set up many, many holding subsidiaries and regulatory models and to worry about that. But the only way that will work is that not only can I get my magic license from Dubai, and let me say, this is not about taking revenues away, absolutely not. If I could have a license in the UAE, imagine I could set up a license in DIFC or ADGM, highly regulated, very respected, solid legal system, English language environments that the business around the world and financial institutions around the world trust. Say I could set up there and I wanted to do business in Saudi. I'd rather pay 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 dirhams and have Saudi added to my license than I would pay 150,000 dirhams to set up an operating entity in the kingdom, to have to employ people, as directors locally, to have shareholding and all of the complexity which comes with it. So it's not about taking revenue away. To some extent, it's about generating revenue in the UAE. But if I could have a borderless license, what else do I need to run a business? What I need is the ability to then operate financially across all of those countries. So I need to have a digital banking platform that is as versatile as my license. And in a sense, if we use blockchain authentication to get the license, there's absolutely no reason why, once I've been authenticated for the license, using AI-based platforms that we see in banking systems like Revolut and others, which are to a very high regulatory standard. In the UK now, you can be verified to purchase land using AI-based verification systems. Okay, so we're at the stage now where what you might call the pinnacle of state control, which is the movement of land sales, is now being done through a video camera and AI-based technology to check KYC and AML, and that's authorized. So if I can do that, why can't I apply for my license in the UAE? Click, okay, I've now applied, deal with all of the KYC and AML, upload everything, have that immediately checked by whoever checks, the licensing authority and the like, and then there should be a button, do you want a bank account? Well, I've already actually provided all of the necessary KYC and AML to get my license, so I should click the button. And because my documents are now securely stored on a government blockchain, the bank should be given a blitvert, if you will, of access. So it has the ability to access, confirm that the government entity for which it will charge a fee, right? Confirm that the government entity says, yeah, we're holding their documents and they're valid. So the bank does not get my driving license copy and my passport copy and a copy of my utility bill. It doesn't get that. I don't have to keep sending around my personal data to institutions. The bank can have confirmation from the government. Yeah, I have all their AML documents. Bank accounts should be open immediately and give me the currencies that support the business I'm doing. And the third element beyond that, and this is where I think there's a huge opportunity for the UAE because it is such a respected jurisdiction when it comes to the economics, is to allow me to trade using a digital dirham. So we're going to have a digital yuan. They're using a model which is distribution from the central bank through the banking system to maintain monetary control and monetary policy. Fine. We're seeing what was called Libra and is now called Diem, with a dollar-denominated stablecoin on the run, provided the Swiss regulators will approve it. Why don't we have a digital dirham, which I can trade through my digital bank? You mentioned Yap, through my digital bank using my digital license. Wouldn't that be incredible? To have the UAE as the first country in the world with a holistic, comprehensive, digital business environment that allows me openly to do business legally across the world in the same way that Emiratis can travel with freedom around the world with their personal passport. Why not as a business allow UAE companies to trade around the world with their digital passport provided by the UAE bank accounts to support it, and a digital dirham currency to allow for things to be paid for without the need to swift transfer for a huge amount of money in between banks. I see that as a huge opportunity for the UAE.
Yeah, we've seen recently that there have been a number of pronouncements in the press that everyone listening to this will have seen, and in typical fashion will have been enthused and motivated by, but also slightly confused. The number of people that have come to me and said, well, maybe I'll wait a month because I'll be allowed to own my company 100% of the time. I think that, what your employees want is business leaders that listen, but then say, this is how we're going to do it. And I think everyone needs to recognize that there's an element of trying things out and of testing. And, we're in that position. I have heard whisperings, which may come to nothing, but we have an opportunity. At the moment here, Mark, I get a discount in certain places because I have had the COVID vaccination. I think that's absolutely fantastic. I am probably more likely to be able to travel more easily because I have both had COVID and been vaccinated. And you know me, I love travel. And at the moment, all I have is these palm trees behind me.
Discount for, Neil? What's the correlation between a vaccine and a discount?
Well, I think it's an example of private business working with government. So we have an app here that allows us to share. So, it reduces the risk to people of COVID being spread. That app has information about the PCR tests that we have had. I don't want to tell you how many I've had, but my app will tell me. So there's an element of that. There's an element of here is my QR code that shows that I had a vaccination. And if a private business wishes to, because all of us, we want to do more business, right? I want people to feel safe to come to my offices. We had a company-wide vaccination program organized that included some of our ecosystem, some of our customers, and that included people flying in from all over the world, people taking visas specifically, setting up companies here, business owners from around the world. And they did that because they want to feel safer. And when they came to do that, they thought, hold on, the weather's beautiful. What do you mean you don't have any corporation tax? And so on and so on. Particularly good timing because the UK is going up to 25%. When does that hit you, Mark?
Again, I think it's really important, Neil, to not tax is not the driver for the success of economies going forward. It is, to my mind, when people talk about taxing as an advantage, it's like talking about the sun being an advantage. It is an advantage, it clearly is, but it will not be a driver for significant economic development. In fact, quite the opposite. I think it's fair to say that as economies mature and develop, there has to be a realization that the infrastructure comes at a price. Yeah. And you either have that as a per usage price. So if you use the Sheikh Zayed Road, you'll pay to use it, and each barrier you go under, you'll be charged for it. Or you can have it as a what many would see as a sort of different distribution model for government revenue. But
I totally agree with you, and I think that the government are, so I fervently believe this is the best place in the world to be established, but it is in terms of both initial cost and in terms of time and in terms of red tape. It's not number one in the world. To transform, as you put it earlier, to make it much more accessible to people so that they can do that remotely, and for them who are typically, let's say, people from Western economies who are used to the more traditional taxation method. You and I were having a conversation the other day about Amazon. If it's not the fastest growing company in the world, it must be pushing it. I know that anyone that is in warehousing or in any of these related industries has just done so well out of COVID now. And these e-commerce revenue businesses are going ballistic. And surely the UAE is a perfect place to house an e-commerce business in terms of its infrastructure, the port, the airline, the ability to have a payment gateway somewhere with extremely low tax. But let's say to these merchants that are selling amazing things that we see on Instagram, but we can't yet access in the UAE, come here, structure everything here, and you know what? Come for free. Why not let them have a company structure and a bank account and access to a telecom solution, and let them then, with their ongoing revenues, contribute a small amount of that revenue towards the infrastructure that we're so proud of here. And I think that when I hear it like that, I hear it very, very positively. And that's the opportunity that our leaders in this country have, which is where we're starting from, is such an incredibly efficient structure in terms of entrepreneurs and business owners. So, sometimes if you're building up your muscles, you need to tear your muscles to get stronger. And I think that that's what we very much need to do here. And I saw a lovely video online the other day, and it was on behalf of Dubai Airport. And it was a lovely gentleman was being interviewed, and he was saying, look, we want people to have the very best experience in the world when they come through our airport. And it's already amazing, let's face it. But Mark, what they have done whilst things have been a little bit quieter is incredible. Your ability to check in now, your ability to move through without coming into contact, without touching other people. It is incredible. And, the airport tends to be the first experience people have of the UAE. And I know myself, I've done a little bit of traveling recently. And when I come back into the warm bosom of Emirates or Etihad, and compare it to some of the other solutions out there, it gives you this feel-good factor, and confidence is that one thing. You used to work for MasterCard, everything else is priceless, or whatever the expression is. So getting that right, but we need to replicate that. So if you can do that in an actual airport, if you can make it almost contactless, then we need to be able to do the same thing for the company formation, for the banking, because there's an opportunity here. Every single businessman listening to this either has his own BVI structure, or perhaps is working for a company that is structured through a BVI. There are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of companies that are structured in that way. That has been the de facto go-to way to do it. And if you're selling a company and it's structured that way, everyone is familiar with it. It's the same thing in terms of, Mark, you and I have been working, and we have just expanded into the CIS through your legal firm there, hence mirroring the Chinese strategy of bridging the various areas. So we've been able to do that in an international finance center that has been very successful because it's mirrored what happened in DIFC. People are familiar with it. Well, I think that the UAE has an opportunity now to create something that people are not only very familiar with, but they recognize as the gold standard. They recognize as the most secure thing. And because I'm a company formation guy, I shouldn't get too carried away with company licenses. Some people in other countries might not even know what a company license is. Let's face it, that license is merely a means to be able to conduct your business, to live and work there legally, and of course to have your banking and have your phone and so on. So it's that secret sauce. It is us saying, and in a country that is pegged to the dollar. That's why I was really interested to hear what you were talking about with the Dirham. It's that kind of bold move that I'd love to, if we were able to do a poll of our listeners now, how many people would tick brilliant? How many people would say that's jiggery pokery? What's everyone's position on that? My position is, I heard you say it now, probably 2 years ago. But I'm coming around to thinking, do you know what? If we don't do it quickly, we're missing a huge opportunity. The UAE can be behind allowing all people to access things that only the inverted commas ruling classes previously could access, whether that be funds that people can access or whatever. I really think that we are a hub for that, and we need to continue to improve our structures and means by people can access this. So one of the key parts of it, Mark, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a sales guy, and the way that I perhaps have had success in sales is in my mind simplify things and make myself think that it's easy. You have an element of that to you, but you also have the regulatory side of things, and I tend to underestimate that. So can you give us because I want to jump in, and anyone that will listen to me in a meeting for 5 minutes, I will chew their ear off about it. But of course, there also needs to be caution. We all need to adopt caution at the moment. So can you talk to us a little bit about that side?
So I think I'm not sure that I agree that the UAE economy would benefit from taking over from the BVI. In fact, quite the opposite. I think that
we shouldn't agree, should we? Because otherwise everyone will fall asleep.
No. Well, I mean, I'll tell you why I think that's probably the wrong strategy. Not that I have to say in any of this. The challenge with just being a platform, but without any economic substance, is that in a world in which we are going to have to get on with China and America, if the UAE is to succeed, by running that kind of platform, we're likely to fall foul of both sides. Because the BVI model is a very, build them high, very low cost model, which adds no economic benefits to the country for the trade that's going through those enterprises. And I think the UAE's gone beyond that. In fact, it went beyond that in 94. The shift away from a pure hub model was an 85 to 94 component. And that was moving things through or above Dubai, whether with the creation of Emirates in 85, the Jebel Ali Free Zone Development and Authority, which started in 1985, or indeed, if you will, with the work that was done on the financial development. But really, it was in 94 that Dubai at least realized that that's not adding significant substance. Yes, there is a boost, but it's not adding substance to the Emirate of Dubai. And from 94 through to about 2002 or so was that focus on not only providing a safe harbor for business, but actually attracting talent to come. With the creation of the Dubai Health Authority, keeping people safe, healthy, with the creation of KHDA, educating executives when they come to Dubai, often at that stage of their career have children. They want to make sure they have a good education. So the creation of the Dubai Human Development Authority. And a number of other elements that happened then, which was about bringing people to Dubai. So moving away from a transition economy, a filtering across into a substance economy. And that, I think, has got to be the trend that continues. So I'm not advocating for a digital license for the sake of having a license number in Dubai, but actually trading elsewhere. I'm talking about a digital license, which is the holding company. And I want to talk a little bit about that. It's the holding company for a business's global trade. That is, all of the economic wealth out of the business is what you might consider Dubai or UAE GDP. It is driving the economy of Dubai. There's two elements to that. One is Saudi Arabia. It does seem to me that Saudi Arabia as an economy is likely to be a challenger to Dubai. I think it's said in as many words that if you want to do business in Saudi Arabia, they'll want increasing amounts of economic interest. There is incentive now for headquarters to be moved to Saudi Arabia, and many of those will move from the UAE, in my view, unless the UAE does something differently. And so my vision for a digital license is actually to create a substantive business in the UAE that allows for global consolidation of finances to boost the GDP of Dubai, and then to provide the ability for people to live and work in Dubai as much or as little as they want. It headquarters in Dubai, makes Dubai their global headquarters, which is really the transition, right? If you remember, Dubai started off in the early days as being, the Dubai office. Then it became the Middle East office. Then it became the Middle East North Africa office. Then it became the South Asia, Middle East North Africa office. And we're starting to see Dubai sitting now as the global headquarters for business for the reasons that you've said. So I think that is the important factor in this, is building a digital business environment which is truly about growing business.
I think you're right, Mark, that a lot of people, when they hear digital, when they hear blockchain, there's an element of mystery to it still, to a lot of decision makers of a certain age. Talking about myself, a little knowledge is very dangerous, and I definitely have a little knowledge. So, and let's face it, the people in the positions of power, a lot of them are going to, this is still going to be a little bit new to them. And you're absolutely right. And you said it much better than I. The BVI system worked very, very well for a reason, and you can't just copy something. You need to move forward, and it's having substance behind it. And one of the things that I think we need to do is educate people that something that is digital can have even more substance, can reach even better. Just in terms of talent, recruiting people, you now can have people working for you who are the very, very best at search engine optimization, not limited by the fact that they have to live, for example, in Dirham. You can stretch much, much beyond that. Mark, just coming back to that text message that I saw asking about, let's say, legislation or process change. You had a conversation with Paul Bryson about some of the things that need to happen in order that Dubai can keep its foot, Dubai and the UAE, I should say, can keep its foot on the accelerator to stay ahead of those other countries and centers in the region that are seeking to play catch up. Can I ask you what you feel, if you were writing the list to the various governmental organizations as to what perhaps we can change and how we can change it?
Well, from what I could see, nothing needs to change. What's holding, and I can only talk of Dubai in this, and the research I've done, I've only looked at Dubai, but of course, the other Emirates will probably be in a similar position. The only thing holding back Dubai at the moment are antiquated processes. The legislation at a federal and Dubai level is modern enough to allow for a borderless license. There is nothing stopping the government of Dubai establishing a new free zone, the borderless free zone, a virtual free zone, if you will. And that would have the necessary rules and regulations that would allow for a truly borderless business. So there's nothing intrinsically in the UAE or in Dubai that would prevent Dubai from being the first in the world to create this environment. On the banking side, as you say, we've seen from the article I saw in Reuters about the launch of Yap that I'm assuming that they have crossed all of the regulatory hurdles that are necessary from a central bank point of view, which would, to me, demonstrate that the digital bank is no longer something that would be prevented.
Well, I can tell you, Mark, on that note, that Yap has launched in Dubai, will be launching in Saudi Arabia. As things stand, it's an amazing system, by the way. It's lovely receiving your card and someone comes to your office and hands it all over to you, which feels great.
But then this digital bank gives you a physical card, right?
It does give you that's slightly ironic. You can then create virtual cards. So your e-commerce shopping habits can remain your own. But I did find it ironic, and secondly, it reminded me that in Saudi Arabia, that wouldn't need to be the case, because the information on their equivalent of the Emirates identity card means that that's already in the system, exactly as you were saying earlier, Mark. That is there in a safe, and the key to that safe is virtually transmitted to the various authorities that enable you to set up that account. So one of our barriers that we face, and the number of we're very lucky at the moment, actually, the percentage of people that are coming here at the moment, relocating, buying high-end property, setting up foundations and trusts, and genuinely structuring themselves in this country, and then realizing they don't want to twiddle their thumbs, they want to create businesses. That is, the numbers that we're seeing are really, really encouraging. But we can still go further. And one of the barriers that if they weren't, there are so many people here who don't mind being here for a month at the moment, but things are going to come back to normal. And when they do, you want a businessman who is passing through Dubai on the way to Australia to be able to set up a company, not to have to wait for the results of their blood test, and not to wait to have to go and show himself at a bank. Why would he have to do that? I know that I deal with a fund here that has offices in the UAE, and Mubadala are part of that, and they've invested in something called Onfido. And Onfido seeks to be, how now an email signature that we have might have our LinkedIn connection. Well, they're seeking to do the same for your, if you like, the legal stuff behind you, so that in a millisecond, you send me an email and I can see that you're someone that I can do business with. And that's, I believe, that what we need to do, which is to make it easy, accessible, but even safer, because, we need to understand that until your Dirham has taken over the world, we are still going to be dealing with dollars as well. So there's an element of being pragmatic.
And it's interesting. You still, if you don't mind me saying so, I think that you're right, because you've got a foot in both camps. You mentioned an Australian traveling through Dubai. Why would they need to travel through Dubai at all? And there is a need to get it right. In my view, though, it's not a practical need; it's a comfort need that perhaps some jurisdictions are very frightened to move too fast, but that doesn't resonate with the UAE. It knows what it wants to achieve and it achieves it. So if any other country in the world had said, I tell you what, we're starting from a pretty low number, but we want to be the number one passport in the world, a lot of countries would have said, oh, it's just too ambitious. I don't think we'll do it. It's too difficult. It means that we have to do too many negotiations and we've got better things to do, and they wouldn't achieve it. But the UAE had a clear vision and it achieved it in a very short period of time. And we all know the drivers, at the top of that in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that made it happen. They made their citizens number one in the world in terms of being able to travel around the world. So it is easy to think about a transition phase of having a plastic card and having a virtual card, of having to fly through Dubai but not have to present yourself for a blood test. Those are transitional phases. I would say get rid of all of that. You have to throw out the rule book of a model of licensing that was developed 200 years ago, when it was necessary to, well, even more than that, necessary to physically attend and sort of present yourself, and look to what's possible now in the digital world. Can we verify identity successfully, perhaps even better than using a physical notary public? Can we use technology to authenticate identity better than using a notary and a stamp and another stamp and all of this? Well, absolutely we can. So why don't we just go to that? Why not say throughout the UAE, no longer do we need to have all these lovely stamps on a piece of paper. We just want you to go through a digital authentication process. Why can't we say, okay, you'd like to set up a company? Fine. We digitally authenticate you and any other shareholders so that we know from a KYC point of view who you are. You are recorded in our system, validated and vetted in our system. Here's your license. Where do you want to do business? You want to do business in Kuwait? No problem. We have a digital commercial license passport with Kuwait. It's 5,000 dirhams. And if you push this button, you can now do business in Kuwait without the need to open an office, get a shareholder or a service partner and all of it. We've taken care of all of that for you. And yes, we're going to have to share that 5,000 dirhams with the Kuwaiti authorities, no doubt. but you can open in Dubai and you business globally. Why can't, I mean, it's difficult to think about because people say that's not the traditional model. That's the point. The reason that in this world of where, frankly speaking, the world is economically in crisis, dollar-denominated economies have to take stock of the fact that there are twice as many dollars in circulation today than there were a year ago.
Yeah.
Now, many people would say, well, that means a dollar's worth half as much. And of course, the logic tells you, of course it is, but it's still the reference currency. So it stays where it is until when?
Mark, something I'm struggling to get my head around. I hear what you're saying. It seems to make absolute sense. I don't think there are big lobby groups trying to stop what you're talking about here. That's one of the wonders of the UAE. Can I ask you to put a different hat on, though, and talk me through the other side of it? Why, when technology does allow us to establish the UBO remotely, when, we can do all of these things and make it more accessible, why haven't we?
I think part is fear of the unknown, fear of the future. I think there's always a concern amongst civil servants that they don't want to be the ones to make a decision in case it goes wrong. I think that many people are employed in the inefficiency of government organizations who wouldn't need to be employed, checking bits of paper and affixing stamps and all of that goes, right? So I think there's a job issue. I think there's a feeling amongst people in government that the size of their budget and their staff is their importance, and that they see that under significant pressure. I think that much of the ecosystem of an economy relies on inefficiency. Lawyers only make money out of uncertainty and inefficiency. So they're not going to vote for anything which takes away the need to have pretty colored stamps traveling around the world for legal setup. So I think there are those that have an economic interest and those that have a personal, let's say, interest in not transitioning. And I think there's the inherent fear of what will happen. And I think that the counterbalance to that is economies are in decline. Remember, Dubai's economy is a hub-based economy. Yes, there's significant progress in terms of the bringing people to Dubai and living in Dubai and working in Dubai, which increases the stability. Wonderful recent developments in terms of citizenship and the like, which will make Dubai and the UAE continue to be a very attractive place. But at its core, as a hub economy, the system's in decline. One only needs to look at Singapore to see that. Now, it's difficult to recover because the world is going to continue to deglobalize for another 40 years or so by all predictions. So there needs to be a transition. And it's the balance, Neil, will be when those that have an economic interest in the inefficiency and the status quo are outvoted by those that see that the decline in economic growth is so significant, there's a need for not just transition, if you will, but a complete change in the way that it's done. And that can't be done at a systemic level. So you can't change a country overnight, nor should anyone. Remember, Jebel Ali Free Zone was an experiment. It was an experiment in the early days. It was set up because of the challenges of the onshore jurisdiction for foreign investors. DIFC was an experiment to see whether economic growth and diversification could be driven out of 100 and something acres of land. These experiments, which have led over time to a broader and liberalized economy across the UAE, where best practices have been shared at almost every level, started with an experiment. And that's why I think Dubai is perfectly placed, because it's got the history of these experiments of saying, we will experiment with a borderless digital economy. It's going to be defined in terms of those that use it, what they can do and what they can't do. It's going to be clear that transactions that go through it are going to have to go through a digital bank. Ideally, it might say, and you have access to a digital dirham in order to settle your transaction. So therefore, the government knows what's happening on its digital platform. Why is that important? Well, it's important because when the UAE goes to Kuwait, for example, and says, could our licenses work in your jurisdiction, then Kuwait may well say, only if you, the government, are sure that people aren't doing anything that they shouldn't, only if you see what's going on. And for legitimate businesses, no issue, right? No issue with the digital bank, no issue with digital currency. And provided they're not up to anything untoward, there should be no issue with the fact that it's sitting on a platform which, as a digital platform, is owned by a government. In fact, many would say that's probably more secure than a platform owned by the private sector. But as a starting point, that experiment would demonstrate the ability to do it. And if it works, roll it out. And frankly, if it doesn't work, we have to look at that option. It's easy enough to say to organizations, okay, we are where we are with it. You can stay on it, but it's going to wither a little bit because it hasn't worked. But there's absolutely no reason that I can think of that would not allow a borderless licensing, banking, and currency environment to exist. The question is, where will it happen first? I suspect it will happen first in China, because they're so far ahead on the digital currency. They've already got extraordinary digital banking capabilities, often through platforms such as WeChat. And I think that because they've got the ASEAN economic zone now within the purview of their, if you will, yuan control, not control, that's the wrong word, but support, then it's easier for them to have a borderless license. So I think China will probably go first on it because they're so close. But the question one should ask oneself is does the world only need one? And if people had a choice of having their digital headquarters in Dubai or their digital headquarters further east, what would most people choose? I think the answer to that's obvious. And that's why I think the UAE has the chance to do this now and to really benefit from it.
I completely agree with you. And I think that one of the potential reasons that we haven't done it yet, that old expression, if something sounds too good to be true, it's not true. Well, I actually would like to challenge that. And that is that if you can't do it in one way, perhaps there's a different way to do it. Did you guys see a few days ago, Damien Hirst, poor fellow, really doesn't have very much money, made, I think, $3.5 million in about a millisecond by tokenizing a piece of his art. Now, that is amazing for Damien Hirst, amazing for technology, but probably a lot of us in that tokenized world, it's still all a little bit, our suspicion is, that it's mirrors. Smoke and mirrors. And one of the areas I heard the other day, and I'm going to gamble that you have some expertise in this area, Mark. Sukuks are exploding around the world. There are so many people who feel comfortable in something that suits their lifestyle and their beliefs and so on. And one of the things that a digital world enables us to do is design something specifically for that objective. So if we were able, and Dubai were able to be at the center of something disruptive that actually suited the way that they feel and their habits and their comfort, and almost appealed to an old-fashioned part of them, but did it in a new way, that could be really interesting. So just as a way of talking to people such as me that have a limited technical ability, is a sukuk something, Mark, that one could tokenize, one could digitalize?
Well, it's only another fund. I mean, bear in mind, it's a fund with different rules, but it's only a fund. It's only a platform into which people put money, hoping to get more money back. And in that sense, yes, of course it can. I mean, that's the nature now of how do we, if we have a wonderful product out of DIFC, for example. So there is a wonderful ecosystem in Dubai and an equivalent in Abu Dhabi. They may not think of themselves as equivalents, but from an outsider's point of view, two highly regulated, highly trusted economic zones. If a product is available in that zone, which accords with my values, has investment returns that work for me, with volatility that works for me, I should be able to access that easily. And to some extent, what fintech has done has made that possible. Because historically, that idea of filling out forms and sending forms to Dubai and having them sent back and couriers and all of that would have made it almost impossible. I would have just stuck with what I knew. I would have gone to my local bank and I would have kept it safe. But fintech has allowed me now at the click of a button to access funds all around the world, albeit I'm using traditional currency to do that. There's no reason at all why we couldn't digitize that and using an electronic currency. So I'm less susceptible, if you will, to the vagaries of the banks and their charges along the way. But if I've got a pot of a currency that I trust, that I'm invested in as a currency, there's no reason at all why I couldn't access any product around the world. It would be absolutely immaterial to me where that product is based, save for, is it highly regulated so I know that someone's not going to run off with my money? And is there a decent legal system so if anything goes wrong, I know that I can try and recover as best as I can? And Dubai ticks the boxes, as does Abu Dhabi, for both of those. So no reason at all. And you're quite right. Most people are terrified of cryptocurrency because the banks have done, and I certainly don't want to suggest that, I'm bashing the banks on this. Of course, they've got a business to run and they have run it well for years and shareholders have done very well. And most of those are pension funds. So, I mean, that's good. That's great. But, banks have done a fantastic job of slagging off cryptocurrencies and saying how dangerous they are. They keep going back to the dark web and buying weapons and all of that, which is a bit like saying cash is very dangerous because people have used it, in the past to buy drugs. Therefore, cash is bad, right? Well, we'd say no, but people are bad. The cash is an exchange of value. And that's where we need to see cryptocurrencies. But because cryptocurrencies are highly volatile, they're seen as an investment product rather than a value, than an exchange of value. And that's where the digital dirham comes in. If I trust the dirham, which I personally do, but if I trust the dirham and the sophistication of the central bank of the UAE to maintain the value of that dirham, then I'm happy to trade using the dirham, but I'd rather not use banknotes or the traditional banking system, which will charge me 300 or 400 basis points along the journey. By the time I've sent money, it's gone through correspondent banks. They've taken a percentage each. They've taken a fixed fee each. It comes eventually to an account in the UAE. The account is then invested into the fund, for which there's an entry fee. Then there's an exit fee to get the money out of the fund back into my bank. And then it wires it back through the correspondent banking network to my bank. I've maybe lost 300 basis points. Well, that might be my return in a zero interest world. Yeah. If I could say, no, I can trade in the e-dirham and I'll place it directly into the fund with zero cost. Why wouldn't that be good for you, for me, for the fund, for Dubai, for DIFC and ADGM? Why wouldn't that be an optimal solution? And who loses out? The people that lose out are those that are providing an inefficient platform for the transfer of value. So what will happen as a result of that is we will see greater efficiency into the system, allowing us all as consumers to get better access to financial services and to the ability to invest cross-border. So it's a very long-winded way of saying, Neil, absolutely it should be digitized, absolutely it should be globalized, absolutely someone in Kuala Lumpur should be able to access a fund in Dubai and Abu Dhabi as easily as they access a fund in London. And absolutely along the way, we should not be losing 200 or 300 basis points of value just for the benefit of sending money to the fund. That's what a digital economy does. It takes the inefficiency out of the process and allows the consumer to deal directly without the loss of revenues along the way with the product that they want to invest in.
Mark, thank you very much. Unlike British Rail, but very much like Emirates, Etihad and the Metro here, we're running on time. So,
showing your age now, Neil.
True. Where are we going to be in a year's time, would you say? Not you and I, but our business leaders and the UAE.
Where would I like them to be?
Where are we going to be? What's going to have changed?
Well, you're much better placed to answer where the UAE will be in a year, but where I'd like it to be is that I and other business people around the world would have the ability to have a holding company of significance in Dubai, which I've opened from my shed in Oxford, which has an associated digital bank account, which allows me to trade using a currency I trust, the Dirham, and which gives me access, unparalleled access to the markets that I wish to do business in without the need for me to constantly re-register and worry about doing business in those markets. That's where I think we ought to be. Now, people will say that's ambitious for a year. It is ambitious for a year, but is it possible? It's absolutely possible to do.
You heard it here first. Mark Beer, thank you very much indeed for your time. And members of the EMIR Advisory Council, thank you for listening. And you're really a great entity. And we love the fact that we get listened to and things get enacted. Have a good one.